Hey everyone, I'm Mark Palermo. I'm here today with a review of the new horror film, The Witch. Horror, and I'm told I pronounced that word strangely, has made it through a couple of different periods lately. Torture porn. We've made it through some of the remake craze, I hope that's over. And now we're at this new level of art house horror. This kind of manifests in one or two movies a year that become a big hit at some festival. And they usually come out with reviews prefaced with this condition that, oh, I usually don't like horror films because they're for subliterate losers. But me, I really love The Babadook. But what's interesting about this sub-movement of art house horror is that it isn't really tied to any traditions or tropes, except what we're kind of seeing so far in It Follows and Babadook in this, which is a focus on internal states. It deals with terror as a manifestation of feeling, which fits with how this era itself is really placing a lot more importance on people's feelings, dealing with situations, listening to problems. And as an experience, I found The Witch to be new enough and novel enough that it kind of took me several hours to realize how good it is. The Witch is set in 1630 and is about a puritanical family of English settlers who are exiled from their community and forced to live in the wilderness next to the woods. And there's some force in the woods, possibly a witch, which is making life very difficult for them. And the family is torn apart, breaking down one by one. And the eldest daughter, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, is thought to be possessed herself. So the movie's about a family tearing itself apart, but it's also about a witch. And the problem that I've often had with movies about witches is that the history is so tragic there that something weird happens in these movies. For example, movies like Hocus Pocus and movies like Rob Zombie's Lords of Salem, there's an actual historical tie there to the Salem witch trials, which take place 60 years after this movie is set. And they say, oh, what if after all the witches in Salem really were bad? Let's work on that premise. And no, you can't work on that premise. These are real people who were executed because of the small-minded cretins who were running around in those days and thought that their rule was better than others. This movie finds an interesting way of dealing with that, in that we're dealing with a persecuted family that's kind of mirrored by this idea of witches. So it's sort of like these reflections of different rituals, the limitation of rituals when they're in conflict. The Witch is written and directed by Robert Eggers, who was a production designer. And that really shows here. This is an incredibly good-looking, very interesting-looking film. This is a film about social breakdown that's also an origin story, and Eggers captures it through visual effects that are once simple and novel. The atmosphere of this film is very rich. It's shot in northern Ontario, and there's individual shots here where you'll get something like a raven in front of the moon, and it's shot in such a peculiar way that it's almost like a silent film. Movies like Haxan or movies like Nosferatu had no real technology behind their effects, but shot things in ways that defamiliarized them. And the whole movie has that appeal. When we see The Witch's House, for example, it has a fairy tale aspect to it. It looks like something from Disney's Snow White, one of the key fairy tale horror films ever. A huge inspiration on the look of Suspiria. And standing on that precipice of the real and unreal world is really what I find fascinating about this movie. And that increases the sense of fear here, because what's familiar is also just out of our grasp. It's like when George Lucas was making Star Wars, he talked about watching Kurosawa's samurai films and not quite understanding the world of that, and just being dropped in the deep end and having to catch up from there. It captures the experience of being a child watching a movie made for grown-ups and not understanding the customs. This might be the mumbliest film since Sicario, and it's only sort of in English. It's that weird tone and dialogue aesthetic that M. Night Shyamalan went for in The Village, but this movie sees it through to a satisfying conclusion. The witch is caught in that world between what's natural but unfamiliar, caught between realism and surrealism. Walking out of the film, I heard an audience member complain that it wasn't as good as Season 3 of American Horror Story, which I guess was about a coven of witches. The Witch isn't what you expect. Fuck what you expect. Forget your ideas about what a horror movie is supposed to be. This movie is attempting something new. I'm not sure that it's fun, but you go into the movie and 90 minutes later, you come back feeling that you've been somewhere and you've experienced something. And that's what more horror films need. So for Blip on the Radar, I'm Mark Palermo. This video is haunted. I'm going to sit here for a minute and a face is going to come out and scream at you. A witch face. I lied.